This is Excel Tips, a podcast for accounting and finance professionals, brought to you by CPA Australia.
My name is Neil Blackwood. Now, Excel works pretty well with dates, and one of the common types of date calculations you perform is you add a number of months to an existing date. Now, just a tip when you are working with months in Excel, if you are just defining a month, it's a good idea to actually use the first of the month to define the month. You could use the end of the month, like the 31st. The problem with that is that because we have 4 different end of month days, as in 28, 29, 30 and 31, then it does raise some problems. So when you're defining a month, if you can always use the first of the month, it makes so many other calculations so much easier. So highly recommend that you do that. If you're worried about trying to get the end of month date, don't worry. I'm going to share with you how you do that. Let's say we want to add months to a date. We can use the eDate function. So eDate takes 2 arguments. It takes the start date, and then it takes the number of months to add to that. Now, you can't use fractions, or if you do, the fraction is just taken off. It's not rounded or anything like that. So if you had 9.6, it would actually use 9. So you can add a certain number of months to a date. Now, that's really useful for things like leases or loans when you want to work out the ending date based on a number of months. Now, obviously, if you're working in years, all you need to do is multiply by 12 to convert it to the number of months, because that's what the eDate function works with. Now, end of month. As I mentioned, we've got 4 different end of months possible. And if you are working with any date that is, say, less than 28, so obviously it's not an end of month, then adding months to that date is pretty safe. Okay, you can use the eDate function to add months to any date less than 28. When you get to 28, that's when you start having issues with things like February, etc., and also anything around 30, 31. Now, the eDate function works okay if you're going from, let's say, a month that ends in 31 to a month that ends in 30. It actually calculates that correctly. But if you're going from a month that ends in 30 and you're adding a certain number of months, it's going to end up at 30 in the future month. Whether that month has a 31 day in it isn't really looked at. If you're adding a certain number of months to 30, it's always going to try and end up at 30. Now, in February, it'll end up at 28 or 29, so you're okay there. But if you do need to go from one end of month date to another end of month date, luckily, Excel has a built-in function that does that. So it's called EO month, and it will give you the end of the month. So this is the end of the calendar month. If you're after the last working day, stay tuned. I'll give you a formula that will give you the last working day as well. So EO month basically, again, has 2 arguments. You give it the start date, comma, and then you tell it the number of months to add. Now, it's not going to add months to that start date. It's going to add months to the start date and then figure out the last calendar day for that month. So that's what EO month does. So if you're working with end of month dates, then the EO month function is the way to go. Now, you can just add or subtract days or numbers from a date. Now, the Excel treats dates as a number. So the way it works is the 1st of the 1st, 1900 was day 1 as far as Excel is concerned. So every day since has a sequential number. And so at the moment, I think we're around the 44,000 something in terms of the numbers for the current dates. So when you add 10 to a date, you're not really adding it to a date, you're adding it to a number. And if you remove a format from a cell that has a date in it, you'll see that underlying number. So it's really working with numbers in terms of just adding and subtracting. So you can just simply subtract 10 or add 10 to a date to get 10 days from there. Now, usually when I explain that to people, the next thing they ask is, oh, can we do working days? And you can. So you can actually add a number of either weekdays or working days to a date. So there are the function you'll want to use is called workday, all one word, and it allows you. This one actually has 3 arguments because it's fairly flexible. So workday allows you to specify a start date, then comma, you can then add a certain number of days to that, and this is going to be work days or weekdays. So, and that's the minimum required. Now, if you just use 2 arguments, you're actually working with weekdays because you're ignoring weekends, but you're not ignoring holidays. So you can actually define public holidays in Excel. And that's the 3rd argument. What you do is you create a list of dates, and all of those dates are the public holidays. And that's the 3rd argument in the workday function. So you just list that range that has all of the days that you want treated as public holidays, and then the calculation will ignore those as well. So it'll ignore weekends, so Saturday and Sunday, and it'll also ignore all of the dates that you've put in that range. Now, if you want to work with weekends that are not Saturday and Sunday, that's also possible. So stay tuned for that. Now, the other way to look at work days is that you might have 2 dates. So you might have a start date and an end date. Now, they may be fixed. So you might be working on some sort of project or something. And you want to find out how many work days are actually between those 2 dates. So you can figure out, is this possible? And there is a function that does that. It's called network days. And it calculates how many work days are between a start date and an end date. Now, again, this has 2 arguments, start date and an end date, and the 3rd argument's optional. And that 3rd argument is the same. It is a list of holidays that you want to include. It's just like the workday function. So if you just want to work with weekdays, then you don't need to put the holidays in. It just ignores Saturday and Sunday. But if you want to include public holidays in it, then again, just use the 3rd argument and use a range that has all of the dates that you want to include as those public holidays. And then the network days will sort of calculate that out. In the article, I covered a formula that will provide the last working day of the month. Now, what it does, it uses the workday function, but then it uses the end of month function to do a little bit of a hack. So you'll remember that the workday function starts with a start date. So what you do is you use the end of month function to calculate. So let's say we're working with January and we want the last working day for January. So what you do is you have the workday function, open bracket, then you have the end of month function, and then you can link to the January date, comma, and then you go 0 because you want the current month end for January, close the bracket, and then you just add 1 to that. So what you're doing is you're giving it the start date as the 1st of February. Then, comma, then you just put how many days you want to add. Now, we don't want to add, we want to subtract. So all you do is you put -1. And so that's now going backwards, but it's going to ignore the weekends. That's the beauty with using the workday function. Now, if again you need to include holidays, then you just put a comma and then you just list that range again. So you refer to that range that has all your holidays. So you can either get the last weekday of the month or the last working day of the month. If you don't have a standard Saturday and Sunday weekend and you need to work with something different. So let's say you're a tradie and you work Saturdays. So you only have 1 day off a week. So you have Sundays off. And so you're trying to figure out how many days between, etc. So What Excel has now are two functions. It's called workday.intl, which stands for international, because not all countries have a Saturday and Sunday weekend. And so you can select from a list of different weekends. So it's an added argument to the Workday. So it's workday.intl for international, open bracket, and then the same thing. So you have a start date and the number of days you want to add, comma. So the third argument specifies the weekend. So you'll see a whole list of numbers. So 11, for example, is that the Sunday is the only day you have off. And then you do another comma, and then you do the list of holidays if you want to use that as well. So you have the ability to select from a list. I'll also share with you if what you want to use isn't on the list, so that's possible as well. Okay, so 11 is the example I used in the video. So there is the international wasn't covered in the article because I sort of ran out of room, but I did include it in the video. So if you want to check out the companion video on the In the Black website, that goes into detail about the international version of Workday and Network Days. So Network Days has the same options. So it's networkdays.intl. You might not have been aware that you can use the full stop in a function name. So these are new functions. They were added a few versions back. .intl on the end. It specifies international so that you can actually select from a list of weekends. Now, let's say you've got a 4-day week. So let's say you're transitioning to retirement and you've only got 4 days a week that you work. So what you can do is you can specify the week. You can actually design your week in that third argument. So the third argument's normally a number. As I said, 11 means you don't work Sundays. But you can put a 7-digit number in there, and you have to put them in quotation marks, and you can define your week. So a 1 means you don't work it, and a 0 means that you do work it. So what you can do is you could define your week. Now, these numbers, so there's 7 characters you use, and Monday is always the first day. So if let's say you have Wednesday and then Saturday and Sunday off. So what you could use is you could use the number 00100011. And so that means that Wednesday is a holiday as well as Saturday and Sunday are holidays. So you can sort of customize your week using that little hack. Now, the number you have to put in has to be in quotation marks. And basically you're defining Monday through to Sunday. And again, a 1 means it's a weekend, and a 0 means it's a work day. So there's an example of that as well on the video. That actually shows you an example of how you can find how many Fridays, for example, between 2 dates. You can use that little hack to do that. There we go. So there's lots of date-based functions in Excel, and as you can see, they can work with public holidays, which makes them really useful. So if you are working with projects and things like that where you need to figure out how many days between a start date and an end date, or you need to add some days to a start date, the network days and the workday function can help. Also, end of month, really handy for anything around the end of month calculation. E-date that we covered at the start, that's really good for adding months to a date. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Excel Tips, a CPA Australia podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, help others discover the show by leaving us a review or sharing this episode with colleagues, clients, or anyone else looking for the best Excel tips and tricks. To find out more about our other podcasts and CPA Australia, check out the show notes for this episode. And we hope you can join us next time for another episode of Excel Tips.